Welcome everyone to this October 2017 MBPN, Moreton Bay Property Networking Group. For anyone who doesn't know, my name is Jeremy Stretton. I'm a Legal Practice Director at Stretton Mason Lawyers, and I'd like to thank the other sponsors for MBPN, Mobbs Baker Wealth, who are financial planners, Crediflex Financial Brokers for all your finance broking needs, Ray White Commercial Trade Coast, and Mobbs and Company Certified Practicing Accountants. Tonight, I'm actually going to be the MC and the speaker, sponsor speaker. I'll be talking about due diligence. Now, this is a topic I've covered before, but it's something that I'm quite passionate about and I think is very important to probably readdress now that we're doing this on a Facebook Live platform only, so that you really can get the benefit of it. I did do this last year, similar talk, but what I found is it was, well, one, it was very popular, and two, people couldn't see the slides. So I thought, given the fact that October's my month to do the sponsor talk, I thought that was important. So let me kick in about my side about due diligence. So what is due diligence? Due diligence is one of those legal terms that us lawyers have kind of invented that basically doesn't have a strict dictionary meaning, but it's kind of accepted that due diligence is doing all of your investigations into a property. Now, I remember many years ago, probably a decade ago now, back in 2007, I did a court case where we were having a fight over due diligence in relation to a property, and a judge actually asked, what the heck does due diligence mean? Now, that was about a half an hour to an hour argument between the opposing barristers over what due diligence actually means. But these days, it's pretty much accepted that due diligence is the investigations that you do in relation to a property when you're buying it. And essentially what due diligence is widely accepted to mean is that you can do all your investigations, and then if you're not happy with an aspect of a property, then you can terminate the contract and get out of it. Usually due diligence is done either before or after a contract, and I'll get into that in a minute, but usually any deposit that's paid is refunded if the buyer is not satisfied with their due diligence. Sometimes it's not, but that's the general course. So when should you start due diligence? If you're buying a property, then you can either start your due diligence after you've signed a contract or before you've signed a contract. So what do I mean by that? Well, often a seller won't want you to find out all about their property before you actually have committed and signed a contract and paid some sort of deposit, even though it's usually refundable. And why is that? Well, people keep things secret. They don't want everyone knowing everything about their property, and they want to see that you actually have something to go ahead with, and you're not just some person just signing up contracts willy-nilly. So that's why people normally wait till you actually have a contract. But if you're buying a property at auction, or the seller doesn't want a contract that's conditional on due diligence, then they may let you do your due diligence inquiries before that. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different things that we see as important for both, for all different types of property purchases. They're all important, and but you need to determine, I suppose, in consult with your lawyer and your accountant and the seller before you buy a property, what actually you need to look into, and whether or not you do that before you sign the contract or after you sign the contract. So I'm going to talk about the different types of due diligence, but the different types of due diligence do change whether or not you're buying a house, an investment house, a unit investment, a commercial and industrial investment, or a development site. There are different things that you need to think about. So just give me a second, just have a drink of water. So the first one and the most common is a house investment. So I said before, house investment or house that you live in. And the reason that that's important is there are different considerations you might have. As an investor, you might be looking more into the actual lease that might be in the property, or its ability to lease. So that's an additional search that you might do or due diligence inquiry you might do in relation to a house investment. So there are basically 5 searches that we would normally get a buyer and investment property to do. The first one is a title search. The second one is a plan search. The third one is a land tax search. The fourth one is a council search, and the fifth one is a water search. We'd also do investigations in relation to the leases and anything else that's in the property to make sure that the investment that you're making is secure. So the first one, and I have showed this before at MBPM, But I thought it was good to, as I said before, to show this earlier. When you, again, when we're doing the Facebook Live, so that we can actually see it properly for people watching this through Facebook or YouTube. So when you have a look at the title search, you'll see that on the contract. Sorry, we'll start with the contract. It will give you the description of the land, and I've blacked out this one because I want to protect personal information for people. But this is a real example of a contract, and you can see that it was subject to 7 days building and pest, and that you can see also that no title encumbrances were listed. So what's a title encumbrance? Well, let's flick over to the result of the title search from this property. Now, as you can see, the title search for this property showed that number one, the easements, encumbrances, and I can't read that word, but anyway, the easements, encumbrances, and interests over the land. I think that word is. So the first one is rights and interests reserved to the Crown. So that's on every block of freehold land in Queensland, that the rights and interests are reserved to the Crown for resumption purposes, and you never quite really own the land fully. The government can come and take it. But you'll see here that the title has 4 items that are listed that are encumbrances, that are easements. Now, our client bought this property from someone who had owned the property previously. And just to go back to the contract, just briefly, you'll see once again that the title encumbrances were blank. So here, the title encumbrances were blank, but here are 4 easements that are listed on the property. Now, what does that mean? Well, at the first instance, when I get that as a lawyer, I look at that and go, well, we do a title search, and some lawyers don't, which I find very bizarre. Title searches are critical. They cost $15 to $20. They are worth every single cent that you pay. And here we did a title search, and we found out that, hold on a second, there are 2 easements that have been transferred over the property. The next question that you need to look at, though, is how do those easements actually affect the property? So that's a very important thing, because in this case, they didn't. So here's a plan search for the property, and you can see there, highlighted in yellow, is the easement, the property. Now, in a plan search, the plan will show where the easement is over the property. Here, when you look at that search, there is no easement over that property. So we're looking at that going, well, there are 2 easements, and let me just go back to the title search. There are 2 easements that have been transferred over the property. Why are they registered on the property? So we had to do searches on all of these easements to figure out, well, what are they and how do they actually affect the land? Here's a Google Maps search that I've printed out to show you where the easements are. So you'll see in the top right-hand corner is our client's property, and down the bottom are the easements. You'll see there's one highlighted in blue, one highlighted in red, and one highlighted in yellow. They're a long way from the property. Now, why might this occur? This will occur because this whole site would be one big site that was probably owned by one person back in the day. And those easements would have been in place to protect people in other sites as they subdivided. So as a property is subdivided, often easements are put in place to protect the owner of those easements going forward. So you can see that in the image that's on the screen there, that this was a big site and it was slowly cut up into smaller pieces. And when that process was done, what normally would happen, and what certainly happens today, is that those easements are extinguished. But in a lot of old properties, that didn't occur. So by doing the title search and looking and doing our due diligence properly, we were able to go, well, hold on a second, that title search and those easements weren't actually on the property. Now, I can tell you, and this has come more from the last time I did this, that it took us probably about 6 to 8 months to get those easements removed. Now, we couldn't do it in the contract because they didn't adversely affect the property, but we were eventually able to get those easements removed after much toing and froing with the titles office. All of the people that own the properties in that area, you'll see there in the not that you can see where my finger's pointing, but I'm pointing to the top right-hand corner where there's lots of little houses there. A lot of those houses had those same easements put on there. So doing a title search, having a look at the plan, just no-brainers for us. As I said before, for some reason, a lot of lawyers don't do it. A lot of people don't think it's important. But it can really cause problems. 99 times, probably 990 times, 999 times out of 1,000, it's not going to be a problem. But for the sake of $20, it's worthwhile doing a title search, and it's another $30 to do a plan search. Do it, work out what there is on the property, and make sure that you get clear title. If you don't, then you're going to have problems going forward when you sell the property. So, for instance, these people, they sold their property many times. The agents hadn't done title searches, their lawyers hadn't done title searches, and it caused all these problems. Do a title search. We don't do a property transaction without one, and neither should you. Don't lull yourself into saving $50 or $60 on searches not to do those searches, and that goes for all the searches that I'm going to talk about. But title searches, crucial. The next one is a land tax search. So for anyone who doesn't know, land tax is a tax that's imposed upon property owners on what they own at midnight on the 1st of July every year. So that means that if you owned 20 properties and you were over thresholds, and I'm not going to go into the details of what they are, but just know, and anyone who's got property investments here probably knows about land tax. You're going to if the owner owes land tax, then that attaches to the property at 12 midnight, on the 1st of July, and then the landowner has to pay that during that year. When you buy a property, that property is bought subject to the land tax that's owed. So one of the fundamental searches, and again, I know that a lot of lawyers don't do it, and people don't do it because they want to save money. What you probably don't realize is that by not doing the search, and if the owner owes land tax, you can actually still be liable for that land tax on the property, because the property is actually charged with the land tax, and the land tax office have the right to go and put a charge over the property. So spend the money, do a land tax search. It's worth its weight in gold. The next search is a council search. Now, again, for some reason, people often don't do them. What the standard contract, the standard REIQ contract has changed recently is if you don't do a council search and the next one a water search, then the seller doesn't actually have to do an adjustment on the rates or the water. Now, why is that important? Well, in Moreton Bay, the council search will show you what rates are owing. It used to be the case that the council search also showed you what things were and weren't approved in the property. And at the time that I originally did this last year, that was the case. Shortly after that, the council changed their search so you can do a rate search to find out what rates are owing on the property. But you now have to do a separate search to find out what is approved in the property. Now, again, this is something that a lot of people don't do. Can I caution you against not spending the money on doing that search? So many people do so many improvements to their house that require approvals and they don't get it. Or they do get approval to do the work, but then the approval's never actually finalised with the council. If that happens to you, then you buy the property subject to those works not being completed. You can't actually require the vendor to fix that unless they've received a notice before you enter into the contract. So if you don't do the search, then you can actually find yourself falling foul of the council regulations, and that can cost you a lot of money in rectifying. So do a council search. Find out what the rates are owing so that you can do an adjustment. Sometimes you might not realize that the seller might owe thousands and tens of thousands of dollars in rates, although it usually doesn't get to tens of thousands, but it can. So do a council search and do a search on what's approved in the property to make sure that, especially if there are additions, that those are approved. The next one, as I said before, is a water search. So if there's an existing house on the property, you need to do a water search because you want to adjust for the water consumption at the time that the property is transferred. Now, Moreton Bay is very good. They help do this adjustment very easily. There's actually not a lot of work that's involved, but do a water search. Make sure that you know the water consumption. So that's investment in properties. As I said before, if there's a lease, you want to also do a lease search. But I also wanted to just talk about unit investment. So in the original slide, I talked about, this was a separate one. Do a body corporate search. Again, there is a cost involved, I understand, but a body corporate search is searches to see what money is owing to the body corporate and also whether or not there are any issues with the body corporate property. So if you're not aware of a body corporate is essentially a block of land that is subdivided and has multiple units on there. So it might be a 6-pack, or it might be 30 townhouses. It will have a body corporate, and the body corporate basically manages all of the property, the common property, and the outsides of the buildings. Why is that important? Well, if there's a problem with that, the only way for you to find out is by doing a body corporate search. So what you can do, and what we do, is we have a service that actually goes in and looks through the body corporate records. You can do it yourself, but if you haven't bought lots of body corporate properties before, you may not know what you're looking for. So go in and and pay for someone to do an inspection of the records. What they can find are things like if there are latent defects, so fundamental defects in the property, whether or not painting needs to be done. If you're buying an investment property that's in a unit complex near the coast, be really careful. A lot of builders skimp out on the cost of maintaining lifts, putting money in sinking funds, maintaining balustrades for painting. They do. There's nothing we can do about that other than doing a search and seeing whether or not that's become a problem, because at the end of the day, all of the unit holders will be responsible for the costs of those. So the body corporate might have struck special levies to pay for these things, and if you haven't done a search and you don't know about them, then you buy the property subject to those problems. And it's not good enough to say, oh, well, the seller didn't tell me that. Well, it's incumbent upon you to find that information out. So do a body corporate search, get an expert to go and look at the property. Usually it's not the lawyer, it's usually a person who does the actual search. So go and have a look at it, and go and make sure that you're not buying the property subject to any problems there. Commercial properties. So I said before that that's a separate thing to look at, and that's because commercial properties have their own unique problems and their own unique searches that you need to do. So all of the same searches apply. But here, most commercial properties that you're buying, unless you're buying a vacant one or one for yourself, you need to have a look at the lease that's in place. Now, when you're buying a residential property, I said before, you need to have a look at the lease. Residential leases are a standard RTA, so Residential Tenancies Authority lease. There are certain requirements, they're not very different. Commercial leases are basically different from one property to the other, because different lawyers have different commercial leases, and there is no standard commercial lease for your property. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that you can just go with the standard lease. There's no such thing. Even the REIQ standard lease for tenancies under 3 years often have special conditions, often have other problems that present themselves. You really need to do, when you're buying a commercial property, do an inspection on the property. You should do that when you buy a residential property as well, but doing a building and pest inspection is a little bit different for a commercial property. Make sure that the roof doesn't leak. Make sure that it's been built properly. Make sure all of its approvals are in place is very important when you're buying a commercial property. But the lease is, I can't stress enough how important the lease is to make sure that you get right. So that's a commercial property. Development sites present another interesting dynamic when you're buying property for the searches and the due diligence that you do. So the two main ones that are in addition to all the other searches are Queensland Transport and Contaminated Land. So let me talk about Queensland Transport for a second. Queensland Transport have a site that you can look at that actually lets you see what future developments are for their site. So if you're near a main road or you're looking at developing a site, you want to do a Queensland Transport search to make sure that the government isn't going to resume the land for anything in the future. So when you do a Queensland Transport search, it tells you whether or not the government has struck a proposal to actually take land. That only happens right at the end of the process. If you have a look at the Queensland Transport website, that will tell you whether or not that site is earmarked in the future or there's a potential works in the future. I know from experience, I do a lot of resumption work for anyone, especially for anyone who knows that side of our work. We do a lot of that work. So often, the government won't announce or will change the requirements for a development. So you need to know whether or not there's works going on near your site, and then work out whether or not you need to actually be concerned about that and go and talk to Queensland Transport, and also talk to people in the local area, because Queensland Transport will only give you so much information, and so you need to make sure that you get more information. The second one that's really especially for development sites are contaminated land. So contaminated land is, if the site was used for a petrol station or arms facility previously, then you should do a contaminated land. If you're at all concerned about that with any site, you should do a contaminated land, but you must do it with a development site, because you never know what might be in there. So the final few are the other searches. And so here I'm going to talk about 3 that a lot of people don't do. But it's still important, very important when you buy properties, and are really dependent on the type of property that you're buying. So the first one is the QBCC. So if you're buying a property that's been recently constructed, you'll want to do a QBCC search on the builder of that property. Now, the reason that's important is that for 6.5 years after a building is built, you, especially a residential building, you can claim off the QBCC insurance if there's a problem with that property. If they don't have insurance, or they're not licensed, then you don't get to claim on that insurance. So do your searches, make sure you know whether or not they're properly licensed. The next one is the Personal Property Security Register. Now, the PPSR is a register of all personal property securities that a bank or another lender have over properties. You only really need to do this search when you're buying off a developer or someone who buys and sells property on a regular basis. It isn't an expensive search, it's like $10 to $15. And what it tells you is if there's potentially a registered interest over any of the property that you're buying. So this wouldn't be the land. The PPSR is the chattels. So the desks, the computers, the doors, the walls, potentially in the property. They can all be Personal Property Security Register charges. So make sure that you do your searches on PPSR if you're buying from a developer. And the last one is an ASIC search. So an ASIC search is a search that you do if the person who you're buying from is a company. Or the entity you're buying from is a company, and it is essentially the search that tells you whether or not that company is in any financial trouble. Now, what you're looking for there is you get a company search. It's 3 or 4 pages long. On the first page, it has the status of the company. If the company is in any sort of trouble, it will have a note there that doesn't say it's registered. If there is a problem, then you need to consult with your lawyer to make sure that what's on there is fine and that what you're buying is not going to be subject to any problems. So if you buy a property and then within 6 months the property is the company that's sold that goes into liquidation, then you can actually lose that property if it was not for real value. There are lots of technical rules there, but do an ASIC search if you're buying from a company. Make sure that it's done right. So that's my analysis of due diligence. If you've got any questions, please let me know. I'll do my best to endeavour to answer them in the comments below. There's lots of different ways to do this. There's many ways to be right, and you don't know what you don't know when you're buying property. So do your searches, find out what you can find out, make sure that you're getting the right advice, and you'll do your due diligence properly. So thank you very much for listening to my talk. Once again, I'd like to thank the sponsors, Mobbs & Company Certified Accountants, Ray White Commercial North Trade Coast, Crediflex Finance Brokers, and Mobbs Baker Wealth. Next month in November for MBPN, we'll have a talk from Dan Scoogle from Mobbs & Company Accountants, and we're looking forward to getting back into having our real deal speakers. So thank you very much for watching this MBPN. And any questions, put them on the Facebook or email me, and I look forward to working with you soon. Thanks very much. Bye.